The last rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the weathered schoolhouse as Eliza Montgomery gathered her teaching materials. The chalk dust danced in the golden beams, catching the light like fairy dust in the otherwise austere room. 5 years a widow and 10 years the only teacher in Silver Creek, Eliza had carved out a life of quiet dignity despite the whispers that followed her through town. Her gentle hands, calloused from both chalk and farm work, trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter that had arrived that morning. The third such notice demanding she vacate the schoolhouse and the small parcel of land she called home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Montgomery? The small voice startled her. Little Emma Tucker stood in the doorway, her blonde braids catching the dying light. Ma says to tell you that Mr. Hargrove is coming with the sheriff tomorrow. She says... The girl hesitated, her eyes downcast. She says you should pack your things tonight. Eliza forced a smile, tucking the letter into her apron pocket. Thank you for the warning, Emma. Your mother is very kind. She wouldn't let the child see her fear. Run along now. Your ma will be waiting. As Emma's footsteps faded, Eliza sank into her chair, the reality of her situation pressing down like a physical weight. Victor Hargrove, the railroad magnate who'd been buying up half the county, claimed the land grant for the schoolhouse had expired with her husband's death. Without Thomas, without his position as the town's former mayor and respected Civil War veteran, her protests fell on increasingly deaf ears. They can't just take it, she whispered to the empty room, her voice catching. This land was Thomas's legacy to the children of Silver Creek. The sound of boots on the wooden porch made her straighten her spine and hastily wipe away the single tear that had escaped. The heavy door creaked open, revealing a silhouette Eliza didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered, backlit by the setting sun. We're closed for the day, she called, trying to keep her voice steady. School resumes tomorrow at 8. The figure stepped inside, and Eliza found herself looking up at a man she'd never seen before. Dust from the trail covered his dark clothes, and a week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw. His eyes, though, they were startlingly clear, observant, taking in everything about the schoolroom and about her in one sweeping glance. "Ma'am," he said simply, removing his hat. His voice was low, gravelled from disuse or trail dust. "Heard in town you might be in need of help," Eliza stiffened. "And who might you be to offer such help?" "Name's Ethan Cole." He remained by the door, respectful of her space. "I knew your husband." The mention of Thomas made her heart clench. "Everyone claims they knew my husband, Mr. Cole, especially when they want something." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. I rode with him, under Colonel Hayes, Shenandoah Valley." Eliza studied him more carefully. He would have been young then, perhaps only 17 or 18 during those final brutal months of the war. But there was something in his eyes that spoke of having seen too much, too young. "Thomas never spoke much of those days," she said quietly. "No, the good ones rarely do." He glanced around the schoolhouse. "He wrote to me once, years ago. Said he'd found peace here. Said he was teaching the children about a world bigger than this valley. And now they want to take it all away." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan Cole's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. "The railroad?" "Victor Hargrove." She spat the name like it tasted bitter. "Claims the land grant expired when Thomas died. Says the school can be rebuilt closer to the new station if there's money left after they lay the tracks." He nodded once, taking in the information. "And the county records?" "Convenient fire at the county clerk's office last spring." Eliza's laugh was brittle. The only copy of our deed was supposedly destroyed. All that remains is Hargrove's new survey showing this land belongs to the railroad right-of-way. Through the window, the sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red, a fitting backdrop to her anger and desperation. They're coming tomorrow, with the sheriff. She straightened her shoulders. I won't leave quietly. No, ma'am, I don't expect you would. There was something like approval in his tone. Your husband wouldn't have either. Ethan Cole placed his hat back on his head. I'll be back before morning, he said, turning toward the door. Mr. Cole, she called after him, what exactly do you intend to do against a railroad magnate, a corrupt sheriff, and whoever else Hargrove brings with him? He paused at the threshold, his silhouette once again framed by the dying light. Sometimes, Mrs. Montgomery, the quietest men carry the loudest truths. As he disappeared into the gathering dusk, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a dangerous flicker of hope. The night passed in fitful bursts of sleep and frantic packing. If she were to be evicted at dawn, she would at least save Thomas's books, her teaching materials, the small treasures that made the schoolhouse more than just a building. With each item she wrapped in newspaper, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about a piece of land or a wooden structure. It was about what the school represented to Silver Creek, a promise of something better for the next generation. As the first pale light of dawn crept through her windows, she heard the approach of horses, more than just one or two. Straightening her simple blue dress and pinning her hair back, Eliza stepped onto the porch to face whatever came. Victor Hargrove sat astride a gleaming black stallion, his tailored suit and polished boots a stark contrast to the dust of Silver Creek. Behind him, Sheriff Mills looked uncomfortable but determined, and flanking them were four rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Hired muscle, no doubt. Mrs. Montgomery, Hargrove's voice oozed false sympathy. I see you've prepared for our arrival. Wise decision. I've prepared, Mr. Hargrove, but not in the way you think. Eliza stood firmly at the top of her steps, looking down at the assembled men. This school belongs to the children of Silver Creek. It was deeded in perpetuity by the territorial governor himself. Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. A lovely sentiment, but legally irrelevant without documentation. Sheriff, the eviction notice, if you please. Sheriff Mills reluctantly pulled a document from his vest pocket, but before he could approach, a voice called from the road. I believe you'll want to hold on to that paper, Sheriff. All heads turned to see Ethan Cole riding toward them, his horse kicking up dust in the morning light. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode Judge Isaiah Parker, from the county seat, along with three other men Eliza didn't recognize. Hargrove's face darkened. Judge Parker, this is an unexpected pleasure, but I'm afraid you've been dragged out here under false pretenses. This is a simple property matter, already settled by law. Ethan Cole dismounted, his movements unhurried. Not quite settled, he said, his quiet voice carrying in the morning stillness. From his saddlebag, he withdrew an oilskin packet. What is the meaning of this interruption? Hargrove demanded, his composure slipping. Ethan approached the porch steps, holding the packet out to Eliza. Mrs. Montgomery, I believe these papers belong to you. With trembling fingers, she untied the string binding the oilskin. Inside was a collection of documents, yellowed with age but perfectly preserved. On top lay a deed to the schoolhouse property, a perfect duplicate of the one supposedly lost in the county clerk's fire. This is impossible, Hargrove sputtered. The original deed was destroyed. The original, yes, Judge Parker said, dismounting and approaching. But what you failed to discover, Mr. Hargrove, is that Thomas Montgomery was a cautious man. He filed copies with the Territorial Governor's Office, with the Army Regiment's Records Office, and, he nodded toward Ethan, with trusted friends. Ethan's expression remained impassive, as he looked directly at Hargrove. "Thomas Montgomery saved my life at Cold Harbor. Before he died, he asked me to keep these safe. Said a day might come when someone would try to take what belonged to the children of Silver Creek." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eliza stared at the silent cowboy, fragments of memories clicking into place. Thomas had mentioned an Ethan once or twice, a young soldier he'd pulled from the field when everyone else had been given up for dead. This changes. "Nothing," Hargrove insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "A copy has no legal standing without the territorial governor's seal." Judge Parker interrupted, pointing to the red wax seal clearly visible on the document, "or without sworn affidavits from witnesses." He gestured to the men who had accompanied him. "These gentlemen served on the original land commission. They're prepared to testify that this deed grants the land to Thomas Montgomery and his successors in interest, which would be his widow, for as long as it serves as a place of education." Sheriff Mills, looking both relieved and embarrassed, stepped away from Hargrove's side. "Seems to me the lady has the rightful claim, Victor." The color drained from Hargrove's face as he realized his carefully laid plans were unraveling. The railroad would have to find another route, or pay Eliza Montgomery a fair price for her land, not the pittance he'd budgeted. "This isn't over," he hissed, wheeling his horse around. "The railroad won't be stopped by some ancient piece of paper." With a sharp command to his men, he galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the tension broke, the small crowd that had gathered from town erupted in cheers. Parents who had feared for their children's education, shopkeepers who had worried about being forced to relocate, all came forward to thank Judge Parker, to shake Ethan Cole's hand, to embrace Eliza. But amid the celebration, Eliza found herself watching the quiet man who had brought salvation with the dawn. He stood apart from the crowd, his expression unreadable as his eyes met hers across the schoolyard. "Why did you come now?" she asked when she finally made her way to his side. "After all these years?" Ethan Cole looked toward the mountains, his voice so low she almost didn't catch his words. "Some promises take longer to keep than others, Mrs. Montgomery." Then, meeting her eyes directly, he added, "And some battles are worth riding hundreds of miles to fight." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting the schoolhouse in brilliant light, Eliza realized that while one fight had been won, a larger war was just beginning. Hargrove wouldn't surrender easily, and the railroad had resources she couldn't imagine. But for the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel alone in the fight. "Will you be riding out soon, Mr. Cole?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Something like a smile touched his weather-worn face. "Not just yet, Mom. I think I might stay a while." His eyes scanned the horizon where Hargrove had disappeared. "Something tells me Silver Creek might need a quiet man around in the days to come." Morning sunlight gleamed off the freshly painted schoolhouse sign as Eliza rang the bell, calling her students to class. 2 weeks had passed since Ethan Cole had produced the deed that saved her home, but Victor Hargrove's parting threat lingered, like storm clouds on the horizon. The railroad baron's influence reached far beyond Silver Creek, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before he struck again. Ethan leaned against the old oak tree, watching the children file into the schoolhouse. He'd taken up residence in the abandoned cabin at the edge of Eliza's property, close enough to keep watch, far enough to quiet the gossips. His presence had divided the town. Some welcomed the protection he offered, while others whispered that he'd bring nothing but trouble. "Planning to join us for lessons today, Mr. Cole?" Eliza called, a hint of teasing in her voice. These past weeks had softened something between them, not quite friendship, but a wary alliance born of shared purpose. "Reckon my schooling days are long past, Mrs. Montgomery." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though I wouldn't mind borrowing that book on land surveying if the offer still stands. She nodded, curious about his sudden interest in property lines and boundaries, but asking no questions. Ethan Cole shared information when necessary, not before. As the last student disappeared inside, he straightened. "Rider coming. Fast." Eliza followed his gaze to the dust cloud approaching from town. The rider's urgency sent a chill down her spine. "Get inside," Ethan said quietly. "Lock the door. I will not hide in my own schoolhouse." She straightened her apron. "Whatever's coming, we face it together." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps or concern, before he nodded once. "Stay behind me." The rider was Billy Tucker, Emma's older brother who worked at the telegraph office. His horse was lathered with sweat as he pulled to a stop. "Mrs. Montgomery," he gasped, thrusting a yellow paper toward her. "Telegram came for you. Marked urgent." The message was brief but devastating. "County Commissioner's emergency session. Stop railroad right-of-way approved over school property. Stop vote tomorrow morning. Stop Judge Parker detained in Capitol cannot attend." "Stop Hargrove," Eliza whispered, her fingers crushing the paper. "He couldn't beat us fairly, so he's rigged the commission." Morning sunlight gleamed off the freshly painted schoolhouse sign as Eliza rang the bell, calling her students to class. 2 weeks had passed since Ethan Cole had produced the deed that saved her home, but Victor Hargrove's parting threat lingered. Like storm clouds on the horizon, the railroad baron's influence reached far beyond Silver Creek, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before he struck again. Ethan leaned against the old oak tree, watching the children file into the schoolhouse. He'd taken up residence in the abandoned cabin at the edge of Eliza's property, close enough to keep watch, far enough to quiet the gossips. His presence had divided the town. Some welcomed the protection he offered, while others whispered that he'd bring nothing but trouble. "Planning to join us for lessons today, Mr. Cole?" Eliza called, a hint of teasing in her voice. These past weeks had softened something between them, not quite friendship, but a wary alliance born of shared purpose. "Reckon my schooling days are long past, Mrs. Montgomery." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, though I wouldn't mind borrowing that book on land surveying if the offer still stands. She nodded, curious about his sudden interest in property lines and boundaries, but asking no questions. Ethan Cole shared information when necessary, not before. As the last student disappeared inside, he straightened. "Rider coming. Fast." Eliza followed his gaze to the dust cloud approaching from town. The rider's urgency sent a chill down her spine. "Get inside," Ethan said quietly. "Lock the door. I will not hide in my own schoolhouse." She straightened her apron. "Whatever's coming, we face it together." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps or concern, before he nodded once. "Stay behind me." The rider was Billy Tucker, Emma's older brother who worked at the telegraph office. His horse was lathered with sweat as he pulled to a stop. "Mrs. Montgomery," he gasped, thrusting a yellow paper toward her. "Telegram came for you. Marked urgent." The message was brief but devastating. "County Commissioner's emergency session. Stop railroad right-of-way approved over school property. Stop vote tomorrow morning. Stop Judge Parker detained in Capitol cannot attend." "Stop Hargrove," Eliza whispered, her fingers crushing the paper. "He couldn't beat us fairly, so he's rigged the commission." Ethan read the telegram over her shoulder, his expression hardening. "The county seat's a full day's ride. Even pushing hard, we'd barely make it by morning." "We have to try." Eliza turned toward the schoolhouse, mind racing. "Mrs. Wilson can watch the children." "I'll need to pack evidence, the deed." "Mrs. Montgomery," Billy interrupted, lowering his voice. "There's more. Sheriff Mills was found unconscious this morning, beat pretty bad." Before they took him to the doctor, he said to warn you, Hargroves, hired guns are watching the roads out of town. Ethan's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. They mean to stop us from reaching that vote. Us? Eliza challenged, though relief flooded through her. I didn't ask for your help, Mr. Cole. No, Mom, you didn't. His eyes held hers. But Thomas would have asked if he could. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. With a quick nod, she turned to Billy. Tell Mrs. Wilson I need her at the school immediately, then ride home and stay there. The less you know about our plans, the safer you'll be. As Billy galloped away, Ethan surveyed the horizon. There's an old hunting trail through the mountain. Pass. Adds hours to the journey, but Hargrove's men won't know it. How do you know about it? His eyes met hers, revealing nothing. Same way I knew where to find that deed. Thomas showed me years ago. Questions burned on her tongue. How well had this quiet stranger really known her husband? What else had Thomas entrusted to him? But time was precious, and answers would have to wait. I'll be ready in 20 minutes, she said, already moving toward the schoolhouse. Pack light, he called after her, and wear something you can ride hard in. Inside, 20 curious faces looked up from their lessons. Eliza's heart clenched. These children were what she was fighting for. Not just land or a building, but their future. With forced calm, she explained there was an emergency requiring her immediate attention. By the time Mrs. Wilson arrived, Eliza had changed into her riding clothes and packed a small satchel with the precious deed and other documents. As she stepped onto the porch, she found Ethan waiting with 2 saddled horses. Her old mare and a sturdy trail horse she didn't recognize. Where did you? Borrowed it from the livery, he cut her off. Left payment. Questions waste daylight, Mrs. Montgomery. The rebuke stung, but he was right. Every minute counted. They rode hard until the schoolhouse disappeared from view, then veered off the main road toward the dense pine forest that covered the mountain's lower slopes. Ethan led them along game trails, so faint Eliza would have missed them entirely if traveling alone. They rode in silence, the only sounds their horses labored breathing, and the occasion. Not together, he checked his ammunition. I'll draw their fire. When they focus on me, you run for those rocks. Don't stop, don't look back. That's suicide. Maybe. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something like tenderness there. But Thomas didn't die, so Hargrove could steal his legacy. Getting you to that commission meeting is all that matters now. Before she could protest, he fired 3 rapid shots toward their attackers, then sprinted in the opposite direction, from the rock slide. The gunman's attention followed him, bullets kicking up dirt at his heels as he zigzagged between trees. Heart pounding, Eliza seized the moment. Keeping low, she ran toward the rock slide, her riding boots slipping on pine needles. Behind her, gunfire intensified. Ethan was making sure they focused on him. She reached the tumble of boulders and ducked into the shadowy passage between them, scraping her hands as she climbed. The natural tunnel was tight, forcing her to crawl in places. Guilt and fear battled within her. What if Ethan didn't make it? What if his death became another sacrifice in her fight against Hargrove? Emerging on the upper trail, she pressed herself against a boulder, straining to hear over her thundering pulse. The gunfire had stopped, silence stretched, broken only by a jay's indignant call, then footsteps, someone climbing the rocks below. Eliza gripped a jagged stone, ready to defend herself. A shadow fell across the path. Didn't I tell you to keep going? Ethan appeared, breathing hard, a bloody gash across his cheek but otherwise intact. Relief washed over her so powerfully she nearly stumbled. You're alive. Disappointed. That ghost of a smile again. How did you? They weren't expecting return. Fire! He whistled softly, and amazingly both horses appeared on the trail above them. Hargrove hires cheap guns, more interested in saving their skins than earning their pay. You've dealt with his kind before. Ethan's expression darkened. Men like Hargrove are why men like me exist, Mrs. Montgomery. The rawness of his admission hung between them as they mounted up. Whatever Ethan Cole had been doing in the years since the war, it hadn't been ranching or driving cattle. "We've lost time," he said, checking the position of the sun. "And they'll be waiting at the main pass. Is there another way through?" He hesitated. "One. It's not a trail I'd choose except in dire need." "I'd say bullets qualify as dire need, Mr. Cole." This time his smile was genuine, if fleeting. "Indeed they do. Follow close. The path gets narrow ahead." As the day waned, Ethan led them higher into the mountains, following what seemed like no path at all, just gaps between cliffs and precarious ledges that made Eliza's stomach lurch. When night fell, they were forced to make camp on a narrow shelf overlooking the valley. "We'll start again before dawn," Ethan said, building a small, smokeless fire. "With luck, we'll reach the county seat by mid-morning. The vote will have started by then, but not finished." He handed her a strip of dried beef from his saddlebag. "Eat, you'll need your strength." They sat in silence, the enormity of their situation settling between them. Even if they reached the commission meeting, they'd be facing Hargrove and his influence without Judge Parker's support. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Cole?" Eliza finally asked. "And don't say it's because of Thomas. Men don't risk their lives for a 15-year-old promise." Ethan stared into the fire, the flames casting his face in sharp relief. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "I rode with a man once," he finally said, voice low. "After the war, he taught me things Thomas never could. How to track, how to survive when the law wasn't on your side." He poked the fire, sending sparks skyward. "She was a schoolteacher too, his wife." Eliza went still. "What happened to her?" "Railroad wanted their land. When papers and threats didn't work, they tried bullets." His eyes, when they met hers, held a grief so raw it made her breath catch. "By the time I tracked down the men responsible, it was too late to save either of them." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry, Mrs. Montgomery. Be alive." He stood abruptly. "Get some rest. I'll take first watch." As he moved to the edge of their small camp, Eliza realized she'd glimpsed the truth that drove this quiet, dangerous man, not just a promise to Thomas, but a chance to rewrite an ending that had haunted him for years. Sleep came fitfully, disturbed by dreams of gunfire and falling. She woke to Ethan's hand on her shoulder, the sky still dark, but lightening at its edges. "Time to go," he said softly. "I heard riders in the valley. They're still searching." They ate quickly and mounted up, following a path so steep and narrow in places that Eliza had to close her eyes and trust her horse. As dawn broke fully, the trail widened, eventually joining an old mining road that wound down toward the valley. "Where the county seat nestled. We'll approach from the north," Ethan said, studying the town below. "Less chance of being spotted." But as they drew closer, Eliza's heart sank. At every road leading into town, men on horseback stood watch, Hargroves, hired guns, positioned to intercept them. "Now what?" she asked, trying to hide her despair. Ethan studied the town layout, his eyes narrowing. "There." He pointed to a church steeple rising above the buildings. "The commission meets in the town hall next door. If we circle wide to that creek bed, we can approach behind the church. They'll see us crossing the open ground. Not if they're distracted." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small tin. "Coal oil," he explained, seeing her confusion. "Packed it for emergencies." Understanding dawned. "You're going to start a fire. People could be hurt." "Not a fire," he corrected. "A diversion. That's stable at the edge of town, away from other buildings. Enough smoke to draw attention, not enough to cause real damage. It was reckless, dangerous, and their only chance." Reluctantly, Eliza nodded. "I'll create the diversion," he continued. "You take the deed and go through the back door of the town. Hall, whatever happens, get to that meeting. And you?" His eyes met hers. "I'll find you." The simplicity of his promise lodged in her chest like a physical ache. Against all reason, she believed him. They separated at the creek bed, Ethan circling toward the stables, Eliza making her way behind the church, keeping to the shadows. The town was busy, merchants opening shops, farmers bringing goods to market. No one paying attention to a woman in riding clothes, slipping between buildings. Then shouts erupted from the direction of the stables. Smoke billowed skyward, and townsfolk rushed toward the commotion. Taking advantage of the chaos, Eliza darted across the open ground to the town hall. The back door was locked. Panic fluttered in her chest until she spotted a half-open window. Hitching up her skirts, she climbed through, finding herself in a small office. Voices drifted from down the hallway. The commission meeting had already begun. Straightening her clothes and tucking loose strands of hair back into her bun, Eliza drew a deep breath. This was her moment. For Thomas, for her students, for Silver Creek's future. She pushed open the door to the main chamber. 5 commissioners sat at a long table, Victor Hargrove standing before them mid-speech, pointing to a large map of the proposed railroad route directly through her school property. The room was packed with spectators, mostly men in Hargrove's employ from the looks of their expensive suits. Clear legal right to claim this right-of-way, Hargrove was saying. The original deed holder is deceased, and his widow cannot. What, Mr. Hargrove? Eliza's voice rang out, silencing the room. All heads turned as she strode forward, the deed clutched in her hand. Cannot defend what rightfully belongs to the children of Silver Creek. Cannot stand against men who value a profit over people. Hargrove's face contorted with fury. This meeting is closed to public comment. Guards, remove this woman. 2 men moved toward her, but Eliza stood her ground, raising the deed high. I have here documentation proving that the school property was deeded in perpetuity. Judge Parker has verified its authenticity. Judge Parker isn't here, Hargrove sneered. Convenient timing for an unexpected trip to the capital, wouldn't you say, gentlemen? Because you arranged it, Eliza accused, advancing to the commissioner's table, just as you arranged for Sheriff Mills to be attacked when he wouldn't support. Your scheme, murmurs swept the room. One of the commissioners, an elderly man with spectacles, held out his hand for the deed. Let me see this documentation, young lady. She's trespassing, Hargrove protested, signaling his men. This proceeding is lawful and private. Private. A new voice entered the fray as the main doors swung open. A county commission vote affecting public lands should never be private. Eliza turned to find Ethan Cole standing in the doorway, his clothes smudged with soot, but his stance unwavering. Behind him stood a dozen townspeople from Silver Creek, who had followed them to the county seat, parents of her students, shopkeepers, farmers, whose livelihoods depended on the school remaining where it was. This is outrageous, Hargrove sputtered. Chairman Wilkins, I demand order. But the chamber had erupted into chaos, townspeople shouting accusations, commissioners arguing among themselves. Through it all, Ethan moved steadily to Eliza's side. I told you to find me, not the other way around, he said quietly, eyes scanning the room for threats. I got impatient, she replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite the tension. Chairman Wilkins banged his gavel repeatedly. Order. We will have order. When the room finally quieted, he fixed Hargrove with a stern look. Mr. Hargrove, serious accusations have been made regarding your conduct. This commission cannot in good conscience vote on the right-of-way until these matters are investigated. You can't postpone. Hargrove's composure was cracking. The investors can wait, the chairman interrupted. As can you, sir. This meeting is adjourned until Judge Parker returns. As the gavel fell, Hargrove's face twisted with rage. And moved inside his coat, emerging with a small derringer. This will not be stopped by some schoolmarm and her pet gunslinger. Before anyone could react, he lunged at Eliza. Ethan moved like lightning, putting himself between them as the gun fired with a deafening crack in the enclosed space. Ethan stumbled, clutching his side. Red bloomed beneath his fingers as he fell. "To one knee, Ethan!" Eliza screamed, dropping beside him as the room erupted into pandemonium. Hargrove was wrestled to the ground by several townsmen, his gun clattering across the floor. "Told you I'd find you," Ethan managed, his voice strained. "Just didn't say what condition I'd be in." "Don't you dare joke," she hissed, pressing her. Hands over his to staunch the bleeding. "Not now." His eyes, clear despite the pain, held hers. "Still not sorry I came, Mrs. Montgomery." As hands lifted him onto an improvised stretcher, Eliza followed, her deed and victory momentarily forgotten. Only one thought occupied her mind. The quiet man who had risked everything for her cause couldn't be allowed to become its final casualty. "I hunted them," Ethan confirmed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. 7 men. Took me 2 years, but I found every last one. The admission hung between them in the gathering darkness. Eliza should have been frightened by the cold certainty. In his voice, the glimpse of the ruthless hunter beneath the quiet exterior. Instead, she felt an odd sense of safety. "And after?" she asked. "When it was done?" Nothing changed. His hands resumed their work on the wooden horse, shaving curls. Of pine, with practiced precision. "Their deaths didn't bring my friends back. Didn't fill the emptiness." He glanced at her, then quickly away. "Just left me with blood on my hands and nowhere to belong." "Until Thomas's letter found you." He nodded. "Took nearly a year to reach. Me, I was in Colorado, working security for a mining operation. Thomas wrote that he'd heard rumors about what I'd done, said he understood why, but—" Ethan paused, remembering. "He said vengeance was a poor substitute for purpose. Said when I was ready to find something worth protecting instead of destroying, I should come to Silver Creek." "But you didn't," Eliza said softly. "Not then." "Wasn't ready." The simple admission cost him visibly. Kept the letter, though. "Read it so many times the paper nearly wore through at the folds." "What changed?" Ethan's knife stilled again. For a long moment he was silent, the only sound the distant call of a whippoorwill and the soft whisper of wind through the pines. "I got tired," he said finally. "Tired of graves. Tired of only showing up after the damage was done." His eyes, when they met hers, held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "When I heard rumors about Hargrove's plans for Silver Creek, about a schoolteacher widow fighting alone, it seemed like the chance Thomas had offered, a chance to prevent a tragedy instead of avenge one." The depth of his confession stole her breath. Eliza realized she was witnessing something precious and rare, a glimpse behind the walls this solitary man had built around himself. "I'm glad you came," she said simply, her hand finding his in the darkness. His fingers tightened around hers. Briefly before he withdrew, standing abruptly. "Getting late. You should go inside." The moment had passed, his defenses rising again like fortress walls. But something had shifted between them, a truth acknowledged that could never be unsaid. "Good night, Ethan," she said, rising as well. He nodded once, already moving toward the shadows where he kept his nightly vigil. "Eliza," he replied, her name an afterthought that nevertheless warmed her as she entered the house. Sleep came easier. That night, despite the lingering threat of Hargrove's return, whatever darkness lay in Ethan Cole's past, she now understood the light he was fighting to find. It matched the glow of hope she'd been nurturing since Thomas's death. A belief that even after profound loss, purpose could be rediscovered. Dawn brought a letter from Judge Parker, updating her on preparations for Hargrove's trial. The judge warned that the railroad magnate's lawyers were building a case painting him as a civic benefactor, being persecuted by provincial small-town interests. "They will attack your character," the judge cautioned. "Be prepared for unpleasantness." Eliza found Ethan repairing the schoolyard gate and shared the letter's contents. His expression darkened as he read. "Character assassination is just the beginning," he said, handing back the paper. Hargrove will try to ensure you never testify at all. You think he'll send more men? I know he will. Ethan's eyes scanned the tree line, as if expecting attackers to materialize at any moment. We need to be ready. I won't live in fear, Ethan. I have a school to run, children to teach, and I have a promise to keep. His voice brooked no argument. School continues, but with precautions. No children stay late. No one walks home alone. And I'll be teaching the older boys to watch for strangers. She wanted to protest, but saw the resolve in his stance. This wasn't just about protection, it was about redemption. His chance to save what he'd failed to save before. All right, she conceded, but I won't have guns in my classroom. Fair enough. A hint of his almost smile touched his lips. Though I reckon young Tommy Parker's already smuggled in a wooden one under his shirt. The shared moment of humor felt precious amid their growing concerns. Over the next weeks, Ethan's predictions proved accurate. Strangers began appearing in town, men with hard eyes who asked pointed questions about the schoolteacher and her hired man. Sheriff Mills, still recovering from his beating, deputized several townsmen to help keep watch. But Silver Creek was small, its defenses limited. The first direct attack came on a Tuesday morning. Eliza arrived at the schoolhouse to find the windows smashed, desks overturned, and a crude message painted on the blackboard. Testimony asked death. She was still, standing amidst the destruction when Ethan arrived, his face hardening at the sight. "You should cancel classes," he said, already moving to clean up the worst of the damage, "and let them win." Eliza began writing desks with fierce determination. "Never!" When the children arrived, she explained there had been vandals in the Keish's night, but turned it into an impromptu lesson on community responsibility. By lunchtime, parents had arrived to help with repairs, replacing glass and repainting the damaged walls. The show of solidarity strengthened her resolve, though she noticed Ethan watched the proceedings with guarded eyes, as if expecting the next attack at any moment. It came that night instead. Eliza woke to the acrid smell of smoke and Ethan pounding on her door. "Fire!" he shouted. "Get out now!" She barely had time to grab her shawl before he pulled her from the house. Outside, flames were already consuming the schoolhouse, orange fingers clawing at the night sky. Neighbors emerged from their homes, forming a bucket brigade from the well. But the blaze had too much of a head start. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, running toward the burning building. "Ethan, no!" she called after him. But he had already disappeared into the smoke. Minutes stretched like hours as she watched the schoolhouse, Thomas's legacy, her life's work, crumble in the flames. Just when she'd given up hope, Ethan staggered from the burning doorway, clutching a metal box against his chest. He collapsed at her feet, coughing violently, his shirt singed and face blackened with soot. "The deeds," he gasped, pressing the box into her hands. "And Thomas's journals. Couldn't save the rest." Tears streamed down Eliza's face as she knelt beside him. "You fool," she whispered. "They're just papers. Your life is worth more." His smoke-reddened eyes met hers. "Not to me," he said simply. By dawn, only smoldering ruins remained, where the schoolhouse had stood for a decade. The townspeople gathered in somber silence, children crying for their lost books and desks, parents whispering about what might happen next. "It was Hargrove's men," Sheriff Mills confirmed, examining tracks around the property. "At least 3 of them. Used coal oil, just like at the stables in the county seat." "This is my fault," Eliza said, her voice hollow. "If I hadn't agreed to testify—" "No!" Ethan's voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation but firm. "This is what men like Hargrove do. They destroy what they can't control." He turned to address the gathered townspeople. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Silence fell as every eye turned to the battered gunman, the mysterious outsider who had somehow become central to their town's fight. "We rebuild," came a voice from the crowd. "Mr. Wilson, the blacksmith. My shop's big enough for classes until the schoolhouse is restored." "I've got lumber," another man called out. "Been saving it for a barn, but the children need it more." One by one, the townspeople stepped forward with offers of materials, labor, temporary classroom space. Eliza watched in astonishment as a plan took shape, not just to rebuild, but to make the schoolhouse stronger, larger, better protected than before. "We'll begin today," Ethan announced, naturally assuming leadership of the effort. "Hargrove thinks he's beaten us. Let's show him what Silver Creek is made of." As the crowd dispersed to gather tools and supplies, he turned to Eliza, his expression softening. "It'll be better than before," he promised. "I swear it." "I know," she said, reaching up to wipe a smudge of soot from his cheek. "Because this time we're building it together." The double meaning of her words hung between them, unacknowledged but unmistakable. Whatever came next, Hargrove's retribution, the trial, their uncertain future, they would face it not as reluctant allies bound by old promises, but as partners who had chosen each other. Work on the new schoolhouse began immediately, the entire town turning out to clear debris and lay foundations. Children too young to help with construction were organized into teams to salvage what could be saved from the ruins. Blackened slate, metal hinges, the school bell miraculously undamaged. In the belfry collapse, the cheer swept through town like wildfire, drawing people from shops and homes. By the time Eliza and Ethan reached the schoolhouse, it seemed the entire population of Silver Creek had gathered to welcome them home. "We wanted to surprise you. Mrs. Montgomery," Emma Tucker called, bouncing with excitement. "Mr. Wilson led everybody, and we worked day and night." "Even the children helped," Mrs. Wilson added, pride evident in her voice. "Tommy Parker insisted on painting the fence himself." Overwhelmed, Eliza dismounted, tears blurring her vision as she took in the details of her new schoolhouse. It wasn't merely a replacement, but an improvement in every way. Larger windows to let in more light, a covered porch where children could eat lunch protected from sun and rain, bookshelves built into the walls. "It's magnificent," she managed. Finally, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you all." "Thank Mr. Cole," Sheriff Mills said, stepping forward to shake Ethan's hand. "His telegram said we had 2 days to finish or we'd answer to him personally. Most motivated carpentry crew I've ever seen." Laughter rippled through the crowd, though Eliza noticed several glances between Ethan and herself. Curious, speculative. Word of their closeness during the trial had clearly preceded them. "Well, don't just stand there," Mr. Wilson called. "Come see what we've done inside." The interior took her breath away. Fresh pine boards gleamed in the afternoon light, streaming through the larger windows. New desks, more than before, stood in neat rows. A proper teacher's desk replaced her. Old makeshift table, and most touching of all, a portrait of Thomas hung on the wall beside a new blackboard, his kind eyes seeming to approve of all that had transpired in his absence. "The children insisted," Mrs. Wilson explained, seeing Eliza's gaze fix on her husband's image. "Said the school was his dream, so he should be here to see it continue." Ethan remained at the doorway, watching Eliza move through the room, touching each desk, each book, each piece of the dream rebuilt. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, a man who had fulfilled a promise and found unexpected reward in the process. The celebration continued into evening, with tables set up outside for a communal supper. Lanterns hung from the newly planted trees in the schoolyard, casting golden light over the gathering. Ethan, never comfortable in crowds, nevertheless found himself drawn into conversations, accepting thanks and answering questions about the trial. Eliza watched him from across the yard, warmth spreading through her chest at the sight of this solitary man gradually becoming part of her community. When their eyes met over the heads of the townsfolk, The connection between them was palpable, even at a distance. As night deepened and families began to drift homeward, Eliza found herself on the schoolhouse porch with Ethan, both of them watching. "The last children chase fireflies in the yard. You've given them back their future," he said softly. "Not just a school, but hope." "We've given it back," she corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant call of a whippoorwill and the soft creaking of the porch swing where they sat. "I've been thinking," Ethan said finally, his voice hesitant in a way she'd rarely heard, "about staying." "And," she prompted when he didn't continue, "and I'm not sure what my place would be, here in Silver Creek." His eyes, shadowed in the dim light, found hers. "The repairs are finished, the danger's past. What does a man with my history do in a peaceful town?" Eliza considered the question seriously. "What do you want to do? If you could choose any life, what would it be?" He looked genuinely startled by the question, as if the concept of choice, of a future shaped by desire rather than necessity, was foreign to him. "I don't know," he admitted. "Never thought that far ahead. Always just survived, moved on when I had to. Then maybe it's time to find out." She turned to face him fully. "What are you good at, besides tracking outlaws and saving schoolteachers?" The question elicited a small smile. "Horses," he said after a moment. "Always had a way with them, even before the war. And building things." He gestured to the schoolhouse around them. "There's satisfaction in creating something that lasts." "Silver Creek could use a good horse trainer," she noted, "and a builder, especially with all the new families coming now that the railroad's taking the southern route." Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. "People wouldn't trust a man with my reputation around their children, their homes." "They already do." She nodded toward the empty schoolyard, where children had played under his watchful eye all evening. "Actions speak louder than reputations, Ethan, and your actions these past months have spoken volumes." He fell silent, considering her words. In the distance, the last of the townspeople disappeared down the main street, lanterns bobbing like earthbound stars in the darkness. "There's something else we need to address," Eliza said when the silence had stretched comfortably between them. "Something the defense attorney raised at the trial?" Ethan tensed slightly. "Which part?" "The nature of our relationship." Her voice remained steady despite the sudden racing of her heart. "He implied things that weren't true then, but might be true now?" He finished for her, his voice dropping to a near whisper. She nodded, suddenly unable to meet his gaze. "I'm a widow with a reputation to consider, and you're not the kind of man a respectable schoolteacher should be associated with," he concluded, a hint of old bitterness coloring his words. "I was going to say," she continued firmly, "you're a man who deserves clarity about what I want, about what might be possible between us." His breath caught audibly. "And what do you want?" "Eliza!" The directness of the question demanded equal honesty in return. She raised her eyes to his, allowing him to see everything she'd kept carefully hidden during their months together. "I want you to stay," she said simply. "Not just in Silver Creek, but with me. I want to see if this thing between us, this connection that terrifies and exhilarates me, can grow into something lasting." Vulnerability flashed across his features, raw and unguarded. "I'm not Thomas," he said, the words barely audible. "Never could be. I don't want you to be." She reached for his hand, finding it trembling slightly. "I love Thomas with all my heart. Nothing will ever change that. But he's gone, and I'm still here, still living. He would want that for me, to find happiness again, even if it looks different than before." Ethan's fingers tightened around hers. "I can't promise I won't bring trouble. Can't promise the past won't find us someday." "I'm not asking for promises, just presence," She leaned closer, her free hand coming up to trace the scar along his jaw. Just you, Ethan Cole, with all your shadows and light. The kiss that followed was different from their first. Not a beginning, but a continuation. Not a question, but an answer. His arms encircled her with newfound certainty, pulling her against the solid warmth of his chest. When they finally parted, breathless and slightly dazed, the worry that had creased his brow for so long had smoothed away. In its place was something Eliza had glimpsed only rarely: peace. What will people say? He murmured against her hair, though his tone suggested he cared less about the answer than he once might have. They'll talk, she conceded. They always do. But they'll also see what I see. A good man who's found his way home at last. Home. The word seemed to settle into him, filling empty spaces long left hollow. "I'd like that," he said simply. "To be home." The days that followed took on a rhythm neither had dared imagine possible. School resumed with a record attendance. The children of Silver Creek joined by others from outlying farms, drawn by tales of the brave teacher who had faced down a railroad baron. Ethan established himself in the old cabin, now properly repaired, and began taking on work training horses for local ranchers. His quiet competence and fair dealing gradually overcame whatever whispers remained about his past. In the evenings, they would often sit on Eliza's porch, planning lessons or discussing the progress of his fledgling business. These quiet moments, mundane to any observer, held a precious quality for both, the simple miracle of shared time without threat or urgency. 3 months after their return, as autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Judge Parker arrived for a surprise visit. He brought news that Victor Hargrove's appeal had been denied, his sentence upheld by the territorial court. "You should know," the judge told them over supper at Eliza's table, "that his assets have been seized to pay restitution to those he wronged. The court has awarded damages to Silver Creek for the destruction of the original schoolhouse." Instead of responding with words, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Carved into its lid was a delicate rendering of the schoolhouse, so detailed she could make out the bell tower and the flagpole beside it. "You made." "This," she whispered, recognizing his handiwork, seemed fitting. He placed it gently in her palm. "Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl, elegant and understated. "It's not fancy," he said quickly, "not like what you deserve, but I wanted you to have something that reflected us, something honest and real." "Ethan," she breathed, her free hand rising to her throat. "Are you asking—" "I'm asking if you'll make this permanent," he confirmed, taking her hand in his much larger one. "If you'll let me stay by your side, not just as a builder or a teacher or a protector, but as a husband." His eyes, normally so confident, held a question, almost a plea. "If you'll let me love you, Eliza Montgomery, for all the days we have left." Tears blurred her vision, but she managed to nod. "Yes," she whispered, then louder as joy bubbled up from some deep place within her. "Yes, Ethan Cole, I will marry you." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise after the longest night, bright with promise and the certainty of better days to come. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the depth of emotion behind. His outward calm. "I told you once that some men aren't made for peace," he said softly. "I was wrong. What I've found with you, what we've built here, this is peace. Not the absence of struggle, like you said, but the presence of something worth struggling for." When their lips met, the kiss held all the promise of their shared future, a future neither could have imagined when a quiet stranger rode into town carrying an ancient deed and the weight of old promises. The wedding took place in June when wildflowers carpeted the mountainsides and the air was sweet with promise. They chose the schoolyard for the ceremony, beneath the spreading branches of the oak tree, where Ethan had once kept silent vigil. The entire town turned out, differences and gossip set aside in celebration of a love story that had become part of Silver Creek's identity. Judge Parker performed the ceremony, his booming voice carrying easily to the assembled crowd. "Dearly beloved," he began, genuine affection warming his formal tone, "we gather today to join two people whose paths converged through remarkable circumstances, whose courage protected this very ground beneath our feet, and whose love grew not in spite of adversity, but because of it." Eliza, radiant in a simple cream dress with wildflowers in her hair, couldn't tear her eyes from Ethan. He stood tall and straight beside her, the haunted wariness gone from his gaze, replaced by steady certainty. He had traded his usual practical clothes for a new black suit, though she noticed with affection that he still wore his familiar boots, some habits too ingrained to break completely. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge asked. "To protect and cherish, to stand beside in times of plenty and of want for all the days of your life?" "I do," Ethan replied, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering. "With all that I am and all that I have, I do." "And do you, Eliza Montgomery, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and support, to build a shared life of purpose and joy for all the days of your life?" "I do," she answered, squeezing Ethan's hands in hers. "Today and every day I do." As Judge Parker pronounced them husband and wife, the school bell rang out joyously, pulled by young Tommy Parker, who had appointed himself official bell ringer for the occasion. Laughter and applause erupted from the crowd, mingling with the clear tones that echoed across the valley. "Mrs. Cole," Ethan murmured against her ear as they turned to face their friends and neighbors. "Mr. Montgomery Cole," she corrected with a smile. "We agreed, remember, a joining of names to match our joined lives." His answering smile held all the warmth she had gradually uncovered in this once silent man. "I remember everything," he said, "every moment that led us here. 1 year to the day after Victor Hargrove's men had attempted to force Eliza from her home, she stood on the porch of that same home, now expanded to accommodate a growing family, and watched her husband teaching a group of boys the proper way to saddle a horse. The vocational school had opened its doors 3 months earlier, already attracting students from neighboring communities. What had begun as Thomas's vision had evolved into something greater than anyone could have anticipated. A legacy born of love protected by courage and nurtured by two people who had found in each other the strength to build something lasting. As if sensing her gaze, Ethan looked up, his eyes finding hers across the schoolyard. The silent communication that had developed between them needed no words, a shared acknowledgement of how far they had come and the journey still ahead. That evening, as they sat together on the porch swing watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass, Eliza rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, "if you hadn't arrived when you did with that deed?" "Sometimes," he admitted, his arm tightening around her. "But then I remember something Thomas wrote in his last letter to me." He paused, gathering the memory. "The right path reveals itself to those patient enough to watch for it and brave enough to take the first step when it appears." "That sounds like Thomas," she said softly. "It does." Ethan's fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder. "I think he knew somehow that I'd find my way here eventually, that we'd find each other." As darkness settled over Silver Creek, lights appeared in windows across the valley. Homes, secure, families at peace. Above them, stars emerged one by one, timeless witnesses to the quiet miracle of ordinary lives, transformed by extraordinary love. "We did find each other," Eliza agreed, her hand finding his in the gathering shadows. And whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Together, Ethan echoed, the word no longer foreign but familiar, a promise and a prayer wrapped in a single breath. In the schoolhouse across the yard, Thomas's portrait caught the last gleam of twilight, his painted eyes seeming to hold approval for all that had grown from the seeds he'd planted long ago. Not just education for the children of Silver Creek, but healing for two souls who had found in each other the courage to begin again. The ancient deed that had saved the schoolhouse now hung framed beside Thomas's portrait, its yellowed paper and faded ink, a reminder that some legacies endure far beyond their creator's imagining, especially when protected by those who understand their true value. And in a small box on the mantelpiece of their home, Ethan kept the bullet that had nearly taken his life at the county courthouse, not as a memento of violence, but as a reminder of the moment when his solitary path had merged irrevocably with Eliza's, when protecting her had become more important than his own survival. Some called it destiny, others divine intervention. But for Ethan and Eliza Montgomery Cole, it was simply the right path revealing itself to those patient enough to watch for it, and brave enough to take that first step when it appeared. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Through it all, Ethan worked tirelessly, directing men, solving problems, his quiet authority never questioned. Eliza watched him transform before her eyes, from the solitary, haunted gunman who had ridden into town to a man with purpose, respected, and needed. In the evenings they would sit on her porch, reviewing the day's progress and planning for tomorrow. These quiet moments became precious to both of them, though neither acknowledged the growing closeness between them. 2 weeks into the rebuilding, a telegram arrived from Judge Parker. Trial date moved up. Stop Hargrove. Influence growing. Stop. Need your testimony immediately. Stop sending armed escort tomorrow. Stop. It's too soon, Ethan said after reading the message. The schoolhouse isn't finished, and we don't know these escorts could be Hargrove's men in disguise. I have to go, Eliza insisted. This may be our only chance to see justice done. Then, I'm going with you. Ethan, the town needs you here. The schoolhouse, damn the schoolhouse. The rare outburst silenced her. Ethan took a deep breath, visibly reining in his emotion. The building can wait. Your safety can't. Something in his voice, raw, almost desperate, told her this wasn't just about protection or promises to Thomas anymore. This was personal, deeply so. The realization sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. All right, she agreed softly. We'll go together. They left at dawn the next day, accompanied by Sheriff Mills and 2 deputies. The judge's promised escort never arrived, a development that confirmed Ethan's suspicions about Hargrove's growing influence. Stay close, he told Eliza as they rode. If anything happens, you head for the trees, and don't look back. I'm not leaving you behind again, she replied firmly. Not for anything. The journey to the county seat was tense but uneventful. They arrived to find the town transformed. Lawyers and journalists filled the hotels, while curious spectators crowded the streets, eager for a glimpse of the provincial schoolteacher who dared challenge Victor Hargrove. Judge Parker met them at his chambers, his normally jovial face grave. Things have changed since you were last here, he warned. Hargrove has hired the best defense attorneys from the capital. They're painting you as a scheming widow trying to extort the railroad for personal gain. That's absurd, Eliza protested. I've refused every offer of compensation. Truth matters less than perception in cases like these, the judge sighed. And perception is easily manipulated by men with money and influence. So what do we do? Ethan asked, standing protectively close to Eliza. Tell the truth. All of it. Judge Parker's eyes fixed on Ethan. "Including your part in this story, Mr. Cole." A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "My testimony would do more harm than good. My reputation is precisely what we need," the judge interrupted. "The jury needs to understand the lengths Hargrove went to, hiring gunmen, attempting murder, burning down a schoolhouse. Who better to explain that than a man who recognizes such tactics? Using my past makes me a liability to Eliza's case," Ethan argued. "Hargrove's lawyers will paint me as a hired gun, claim she brought me in to intimidate him. They'll say that regardless," the judge countered. "Better to address it directly than let them spin their own narrative." Eliza, who had been listening, silently placed her hand on Ethan's arm. "He's right," she said softly. "The whole truth is our only chance." The conflict was plain on Ethan's face, his desire to protect her warring with the knowledge that his past, once revealed in open court, could never be hidden again. Finally he nodded, a short, sharp movement of acceptance. "I'll testify," he agreed, "but I want guarantees about her safety during and after the trial." "Already arranged," Judge Parker assured him. "Armed guards, private accommodations, the works." That night, in the small boarding house where they'd been given rooms, Eliza found Ethan on the back porch, staring into the darkness. She joined him silently, their shoulders almost touching as they leaned against the railing. "Are you afraid," she asked after a while, "of what might come out at the trial?" He considered the question, his profile sharp against the starlit sky. "Not afraid, exactly, just resigned." He turned to face her. "I've spent years trying to outrun my reputation. Tomorrow I have to embrace it, to help me, to help you," he agreed, "and maybe to finally stop running." Impulsively, she reached for his hand, her fingers twining with his. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Ethan, I want you to know—" The crack of a rifle cut through the night, followed by the splintering of wood inches from their heads. Ethan reacted instantly, tackling Eliza to the porch floor as two more shots splintered the railing where they'd been standing. "Stay down!" he ordered, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. Returning fire toward the muzzle flash in the distant trees, he kept his body positioned over hers, shielding her from potential bullets. Shouts erupted from inside the boarding. House's Sheriff Mills and the deputies responded to the gunfire. The attacker melted away into the night, leaving only the sharp scent of powder smoke and 3 bullet holes in the porch railing as evidence of the near miss. When it was clear the danger had passed, Ethan helped Eliza to her feet, his hands lingering on her arms longer than necessary. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him, though her heart pounded painfully in her chest. "But this proves how desperate Hargrove is to stop my testimony." Ethan's expression hardened. "He's going to fail," he said with a conviction that sent a shiver down her spine. "Whatever it takes, Eliza, I swear to you, Hargrove will pay for what he's done." The attempted assassination changed everything. Judge Parker ordered Eliza moved to private quarters in the courthouse itself with round-the-clock guards. Ethan refused to leave her side, sleeping in a chair outside her door, despite her protests that he needed rest before his own testimony. The trial began the next morning with heightened security. The courthouse was packed, every seat filled with spectators eager to witness the showdown between the small-town schoolteacher and the powerful railroad magnate. Victor Hargrove sat at the defense table, immaculately dressed and seemingly unconcerned, flanked by 3 expensive lawyers. Eliza's testimony came first, a clear, detailed account of the land dispute, Hargrove's threats, the attack at the commission meeting, and the subsequent burning of the schoolhouse. The defense attorney's cross-examination was brutal, questioning everything from her relationship with Thomas to her financial situation after his death. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Montgomery," the lead attorney asked with false sympathy, "that you've been struggling to maintain that schoolhouse since your husband's passing?" That you saw the railroad's interest as an opportunity for financial gain. The only thing I saw, Eliza replied steadily, was a threat to the education of Silver Creek's children. My financial situation is modest, but stable. I've refused all offers of compensation from Mr. Hargrove. And this mysterious benefactor who appeared so conveniently with the deed, Mr. Cole, I believe. What exactly is your relationship with him? Eliza's eyes found Ethan in the gallery. Mr. Cole was a friend of my late husband's. He came to help when he learned of our situation. A friend? The attorney's voice dripped with insinuation. Or something more? Perhaps a hired gun brought in to intimidate my client? Objection, the prosecutor called. Counsel is making accusations, not asking questions. Sustained, Judge Parker ruled. Move on, counselor. But the damage was done. Whispers rippled through the courtroom as spectators eyed Ethan with new interest. The mysterious stranger, the widow's protector, their relationship suddenly the subject of speculation. When Ethan took the stand the next day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. He spoke in his usual quiet way, recounting his history. With Thomas, his knowledge of the deed and the events since his arrival in Silver Creek. But when the defense began its cross-examination, the atmosphere shifted. Mr. Cole, the attorney began, circling like a predator, would you tell the court your full occupation? Ethan's face remained impassive. I've worked as a bounty hunter, security consultant, and tracker. Interesting terms for a gunman for hire. The attorney produced a yellowed wanted poster. Is this you, Mr. Cole? Wanted in Wyoming territory for the deaths of 3 men. A murmur swept the courtroom. Eliza felt her heart sink as Ethan nodded once. It was me, he confirmed. Those men murdered a schoolteacher and her husband in cold blood. I tracked them legal, with proper warrants. The charges were dropped when the full circumstances came to light. How convenient. The attorney produced more papers. And these reports of gunfights in Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, all self-defense as well, I suppose. We don't need money, Eliza began, but the judge raised his hand. It's not money exactly. Hargrove owned a parcel of land adjacent to the school property, prime grazing land with good water access. It's yours now, Mrs. Montgomery. Or rather, it belongs to the school trust. Ethan, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. How much land? 40 acres, the judge replied. Enough for a proper expansion of the school grounds, with room left over for other purposes. The meaningful glance between the judge and Ethan wasn't lost on Eliza, though she chose not to comment. Later, after their guest had retired to the spare room, she found Ethan on the porch, staring thoughtfully at the star-lit sky. You're planning something, she observed, settling beside him. Something to do with that land. He nodded slowly. Been thinking about the future, about what Silver Creek needs, what the children need. And what's that? A place to learn more than just reading and figures. His eyes met hers, a quiet excitement in their depths. A place to learn about horses, about building, about growing things. Thomas always said education was more than books. Understanding dawned. You want to expand the school, create something more comprehensive. If you'd allow it, he said carefully. It would be your decision, of course. The land belongs to the school trust, and you're the trustee. Our decision, she corrected gently, and I think it's brilliant. The older boys especially need practical skills as much as academic knowledge. His smile, no longer a ghost, but a full, transformative expression, warmed her more thoroughly than the evening's lingering heat. I'd need to build a proper stable first, maybe a workshop, eventually more classrooms. You're thinking quite far ahead, she noted, her own smile matching his. For the first time in my life, he agreed, I'm thinking beyond tomorrow. beyond survival. His gaze turned thoughtful again. Feels strange. Good, but strange. Winter came early that year, blanketing Silver Creek in pristine white by mid-November. Construction on the new stables had to wait, but planning continued. Ethan spent evenings at Eliza's table, drawing detailed designs by lamplight while she graded papers beside him. The domesticity of these scenes wasn't lost on either of them, nor on the town's more observant residents. The whispers began predictably. A widow and a former gunman spending so much time together was bound to raise eyebrows, even in a town as indebted to both as Silver Creek. Though no one dared question Eliza directly, she felt the weight of speculative glances and suddenly silent conversations when she entered the general store. "It's not fair to you," Ethan said one evening when she mentioned a particularly awkward encounter with the minister's wife. "Your reputation—" "My reputation is my own concern," she interrupted. "Firmly. And I'm not ashamed of anything we've done. Nor should you be." His hand found hers across the table, warm and calloused. "But I am concerned about how this affects your standing in the community. As the teacher, I'm held to certain standards," she acknowledged. "Standards that include honesty, integrity, and the courage to live truthfully." She turned her hand to clasp his, more securely. "I'm not hiding what I feel for you, Ethan. Not anymore." The naked vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. This man, who had faced gunfights without flinching, looked almost afraid of the gift she offered so freely. "What exactly do you feel?" he asked, his voice hushed in the quiet room. "Love," she said simply. "I love you, Ethan Cole, not because you saved me or the school, but because of who you are, the man beneath the legend, the heart beneath the scars." He stood abruptly, crossing to the window where snow fell in lazy spirals past the glass. For a long moment, he stood with his back to her, shoulders rigid. When he finally turned, his expression was one of wonder mingled with lingering disbelief. "I never thought—" he began, then stopped, gathering himself. "After everything I've done, everywhere I've been, I never imagined I could find you." His voice roughened with emotion. "I love you too, Eliza, more than I have words to express." "Then don't use words," she suggested softly, rising. To join him by the window. In the golden lamplight, their shadows merged on the wall behind them, no longer separate entities, but a single, unified shape. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing boundaries and creating a world made new. Spring arrived with explosive green, the mountains shedding their white cloaks for emerald finery. As the ground thawed, work began on the new stables adjacent. To the schoolhouse, Ethan led the construction, teaching older students the basics of carpentry as they worked. Eliza often watched from the schoolhouse steps during lunch breaks, her heart full at the sight of this once solitary man surrounded by eager young apprentices. On a particularly fine April morning, as dogwood blossoms drifted like snow across the schoolyard, Judge Parker returned to Silver Creek. This time, he brought official documents establishing what would be called the Montgomery Vocational School as an expansion of the original educational trust. "The territorial governor himself has taken an interest in your project," the judge explained, as they walked the property line between the original schoolhouse and the newly acquired land. "He sees it as a model for what education might become. In these parts, practical knowledge alongside academic learning." Ethan, who had been measuring posts for a boundary fence, looked genuinely startled. "Didn't expect recognition from such high places?" "Get used to it," the judge advised with a chuckle. "Word travels. What you two are building here is something special, something that honors Thomas's vision while expanding it for a new generation." The mention of Thomas brought a momentary solemnity to the conversation. Though his portrait still hung in the schoolhouse, his memory had gradually transformed from a raw wound to a cherished legacy for both Eliza and Ethan. That evening, after the judge had departed and the day's work was done, Ethan led Eliza to a hilltop overlooking the entire property. The setting sun cast long shadows across the valley, gilding the half-built stables and the schoolhouse in amber light. "I wanted you to see it as I see it," he explained, gesturing to the panorama before them, "not just what is, but what will be." Together they stood in comfortable silence, envisioning the future taking shape below, new buildings rising, orchards planted, fields cultivated, a place where generations of children would learn not just from books, but from the land itself. "It's more than I ever dreamed possible," Eliza admitted, leaning into his solid warmth beside her. "There's something else I've been dreaming of," Ethan said, his voice holding an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "Something I've been working toward, but wasn't sure I had the right to ask." She turned to find him watching her with an intensity that took her breath away. "You can ask me anything, Ethan. You know that."